Everyone ignored the warning signs, except one waitress who saved a billionaire's life. The Sunrise Grand Hotel restaurant buzzed with wealthy guests, business executives, and tourists enjoying expensive breakfasts. Among the staff moved Tanya Brooks, a hard-working waitress who had mastered the art of being invisible. Guests rarely looked at her face. They only saw the coffee she poured or the plates she carried. That morning, security guards suddenly stiffened. A tall man in a navy suit walked in, followed by assistants and advisors whispering urgently. Everyone recognized him. Ethan Caldwell, tech billionaire, CEO of Caldwell Innovations, one of the richest men in the country. The manager rushed over, personally escorting him to the best table. Waiters whispered, "That's him. He owns half the city, worth billions." Tanya simply picked up her notepad and approached. "Good morning, sir." "Coffee?" Ethan nodded, distracted, already on a call. But as she poured his coffee, Tanya noticed something strange. His hand trembled slightly, his skin looked pale, and sweat dotted his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. She frowned. Something isn't right. Executives at Ethan's table laughed loudly, their polished voices rising above the soft jazz playing in the background. Crystal glasses clinked as deals were toasted, mergers discussed, and numbers thrown around casually, as if millions of dollars were nothing more than spare change. Expensive watches flashed under the restaurant lights. Tailored suits, confident smiles, and calculated charm filled the private dining section. To anyone watching, it was simply another successful business dinner among powerful men and women who controlled industries. But Tanya kept watching. She stood near the service station, pretending to organize silverware while her eyes kept drifting back to Ethan. She had served enough tables to recognize wealthy clients who demanded attention, and Ethan Cole was one of them. Tech billionaire, investor, magazine covers. Everyone in the city knew his name. And tonight, his presence had the restaurant manager nearly panicking to ensure everything went perfectly. Yet Tanya felt uneasy. Not because of his status, but because something about him felt wrong. Ethan laughed at something one of his executives said, but the laugh came a second too late, forced and strained. As he leaned back in his chair, his hand briefly pressed against his chest, just for a moment, a subtle motion, so subtle that no one at the table reacted. The conversation continued without pause. But Tanya noticed. She always noticed small things. Years of waitressing had trained her to read moods instantly: annoyed customers, impatient diners, couples about to argue, children about to spill drinks. Body language spoke louder than words. And Ethan's body was speaking clearly. He rubbed his chest again, this time longer, his fingers pressing slightly as though trying to ease discomfort. Then his jaw tightened. His smile froze for a fraction of a second before returning. He nodded while someone pitched an investment idea, but Tanya saw the strain behind his calm expression. Her stomach twisted. The memory came back instantly. Her father sitting at their small kitchen table years ago, doing the exact same thing, rubbing his chest, ignoring discomfort, laughing it off when her mother worried, saying he was just tired from work. 2 hours later, he collapsed in their living room. The ambulance sirens. Her mother crying. Doctors running past them in the emergency hallway. And then silence. Tanya blinked, forcing herself back to the present, but the memory left her uneasy. She glanced again at Ethan. This time, he reached down and subtly squeezed his left arm, as if trying to ease numbness or pain. Classic warning signs. But the table continued its conversation about stock prices and international expansion. No one noticed, or worse, they didn't care. Business always came first in circles like these. Tanya picked up a fresh plate of toast and headed toward the table, her steps slower than usual as doubt filled her mind. Maybe she was imagining things, maybe he really was just tired. Rich executives probably worked non-stop. Stress could look like illness. Still, something told her not to ignore it. She placed the toast carefully beside Ethan and leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Sir, are you feeling okay?" One executive snapped immediately, irritation flashing across his face. He's fine, just bring the food. Tanya straightened, embarrassed, but Ethan waved the man off with a weak smile. It's okay, Ethan said, though his voice sounded thinner now. Just tired, busy week. He tried to sound casual, but Tanya noticed his breathing had changed. It was shallower, quicker, like he couldn't quite get enough air. Tiny beads of sweat now formed near his hairline despite the cool temperature in the restaurant. She stepped away, but her concern only grew. From across the room, she watched again. Ethan shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. He adjusted his tie, loosened his collar slightly, then leaned forward as if trying to breathe easier. The executives kept talking. One laughed loudly at a joke. Another checked his phone, barely paying attention to Ethan at all. Tanya carried drinks to another table, but her eyes kept returning to Ethan. Something felt off. Her instincts screamed that something bad was coming. She remembered the hospital doctor explaining to her mother, using complicated medical words Tanya didn't fully understand at the time. Later, she learned the basics: chest pressure, arm pain, shortness of breath, nausea, sweating, signs people ignore, signs people dismiss until it's too late. Ethan showed almost all of them. She hesitated. Should she say something again? It wasn't her place. Customers hated interference. The manager would probably scold her for bothering VIP guests. Tips mattered. Jobs mattered. But lives mattered more. As she passed the table again, Ethan reached for his water glass. His hand trembled slightly, and he missed the glass before grabbing it on the second try. No one reacted. They were too busy arguing about projected profits. Tanya's pulse quickened. She imagined the scene unfolding again: sirens, panic, regret, people wishing someone had spoken sooner. She swallowed hard. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she'd embarrass herself. Maybe Ethan would laugh and tell her to mind her own business. But what if she was right? A sudden cough pulled her attention back. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his face pale now. He pressed his chest again, this time longer, his conversations slowing. His responses became shorter. Yes, good idea. Sure, we'll discuss it. His focus was fading. One executive finally glanced at him. You okay, Ethan? Yeah, Ethan muttered. Just heartburn, I think. Followed, too much steak, someone joked. Occupational hazard, another added. The moment passed, but Tanya saw Ethan discreetly grip the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening. Sweat now rolled down his temple. His breathing sounded strained even from several feet away. No one else seemed to see it or care. They saw a billionaire, not a human being. Tanya's chest tightened. She knew this pattern. Powerful people ignored weakness. They kept pushing until their bodies forced them to stop, and sometimes stopping meant never getting back up. She stood frozen near the kitchen entrance, tray in hand, watching Ethan's forced smile slowly crumble. Something inside her told her the night was about to change, and if no one acted soon, it might be too late. Minutes later, Ethan suddenly froze mid-sentence, his confident tone cutting off so abruptly that the executive across from him paused mid-laugh. For a second, it looked as if Ethan had simply forgotten what he was about to say. His eyes unfocused, staring somewhere beyond the polished restaurant walls. Then his coffee cup slipped from his hand. It hit the marble floor and shattered, the sharp crack echoing through the dining area like a gunshot. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Ethan's other hand flew to his chest as his face twisted in sudden, unmistakable pain. Chaos erupted instantly. Chairs scraped loudly as executives jumped to their feet. One of them reached out instinctively but hesitated, unsure what to do. Another started talking too fast, panic rising in his voice. Sir, someone called out, as if Ethan had simply zoned out. Mr. Caldwell, another voice added, louder this time. A third executive fumbled for his phone while shouting, "Call security." None of them moved closer. None of them seemed prepared for reality intruding into their perfectly controlled business evening. Ethan tried to stand, but his knees buckled. His body twisted sideways, knocking into the table as plates and glasses rattled. A half-second later, he collapsed against his chair, gasping. Tanya, standing near the service counter, saw it all happen in what felt like slow motion. The warning signs she'd noticed now exploded into reality. Her mind didn't hesitate. Training and instinct took over. Call an ambulance now, she shouted, her voice cutting through the confusion with surprising authority. Conversations throughout the restaurant stopped completely. The room that had buzzed with luxury and laughter seconds earlier fell into stunned silence. Tanya rushed forward, weaving past frozen executives and startled diners. Ethan was sliding out of his chair, his hand still clutched tightly over his chest, his face pale and drenched in sweat. She dropped her tray without caring where it landed and caught his shoulder just before his head hit the floor. Carefully, she guided him down, lowering him onto his back, remembering every step from the emergency training the hotel required all staff to take each year. Around her, panic spread. Some guests stood up to get a better view. Others pulled out their phones, whispering excitedly as they started recording. The flashing screens irritated her, but she ignored them. None of that mattered. Only Ethan mattered right now. "Sir, stay with me," Tanya urged, kneeling beside him. His breathing came in short, broken gasps. His eyes fluttered, confused and frightened. "Help is coming," she said, forcing calm into her voice even as her own heart pounded violently in her chest. One executive crouched nearby, his hands trembling. "What do we do? Someone do something." Another man hovered helplessly, still holding his phone as if it might somehow solve the situation. Tanya quickly checked Ethan's pulse the way she'd been taught. It was weak, too weak, and slowing. Fear surged through her, but she pushed it down. There was no room for panic now. She tilted Ethan's head slightly to keep his airway open. His lips were beginning to lose color. Someone shouted that the ambulance was on its way. Another voice told people to move back, but many guests kept filming, drawn by the shock of seeing a billionaire collapsed on a restaurant floor. Tanya barely noticed them. All she saw was her father again, lying on their living room carpet, people standing around in confusion before the paramedics arrived too late. She refused to let that memory repeat itself. Ethan's body suddenly went slack. His chest stopped moving. For a terrifying second there was nothing, no breath, no response. "Sir, sir," Tanya called, tapping his shoulder harder. Nothing. Her stomach dropped. She checked again for a pulse, faint, nearly gone. Her hands shook as reality hit her. Cardiac arrest, right here, right now. Without another second of hesitation, Tanya positioned her hands in the center of Ethan's chest, just like the instructors had shown her during training. She interlocked her fingers, locked her elbows, and began chest compressions, hard and fast. The sound of compressions echoed sickeningly in the quiet restaurant. Gasps rose from nearby guests. Some turned away, unable to watch. Tanya counted under her breath to keep rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her arms strained, but she didn't slow down. One executive leaned closer, panicked. "Should we move him somewhere?" Tanya snapped without looking up. "No, let me work." Her tone shocked him into silence. Sweat formed on her forehead as she kept compressions steady, remembering every instruction drilled into her months earlier. Push deep, keep rhythm, don't stop unless help arrives. Seconds blurred into minutes. Someone cried quietly. The manager arrived, pale and frantic, trying to clear space. Phones continued recording. Tanya focused only on Ethan's still body beneath her hands. "Come on," she whispered. "Stay with me." Her muscles burned, but she kept going. She refused to stop. Finally, faint sirens cut through the heavy silence outside. Relief surged through her chest. Moments later, the restaurant doors burst open as paramedics rushed in, equipment bags swinging at their sides. They quickly took control, kneeling beside Ethan with practiced speed. One medic attached monitoring pads while another prepared oxygen. Tanya moved aside reluctantly, her hands still trembling from adrenaline. She watched anxiously as the paramedics worked. A machine beeped sharply, then steadied. One medic nodded. "We've got rhythm," he said. Relief washed over the room. Ethan was lifted carefully onto a stretcher as medical staff continued treatment, moving with urgent efficiency. As they prepared to wheel him out, one paramedic looked at Tanya, his expression serious but grateful. "You kept him alive," he said. Tanya blinked, her mind still catching up to everything that had happened. Around her, the restaurant buzz slowly returned, but nothing felt the same. Glass shards still littered the floor. Half-eaten meals sat forgotten. Executives whispered in stunned disbelief. Guests replayed their recordings. But Tanya stood frozen, staring at the stretcher disappearing through the doors, her heart still racing. Just minutes ago, it had been another routine shift, another table, another powerful guest, and now everything had changed, for Ethan and for her. News spread fast, faster than anyone inside the restaurant could have imagined. By the time Ethan Caldwell's ambulance reached the hospital, social media was already exploding with videos recorded by diners who had witnessed the collapse. Headlines began appearing within minutes across news websites and television channels. Billionaire CEO collapses during breakfast meeting. Tech mogul rushed to hospital after medical emergency. And chaos at luxury restaurant as business tycoon suffers apparent heart attack. Reporters scrambled for details, speculating about his health, his company's future, and the possible financial impact if something happened to him. News vans crowded the hospital entrance before doctors had even stabilized him. Cameras flashed as journalists stood outside behind barricades, speaking urgently into microphones while viewers across the country watched live updates. Rumors spread wildly. Some claimed Ethan was already gone. Others reported he was in critical condition. Investors panicked, and stock markets reacted nervously as speculations spread online. Inside the hospital, however, reality was quieter but far more intense. Doctors and nurses moved quickly through emergency procedures, focused solely on keeping Ethan alive. Machines beeped steadily while medical teams worked to clear blocked arteries and stabilize his heart rhythm. Hours passed in tense silence for Ethan's family and company executives who rushed to the hospital after hearing the news. Finally, late in the afternoon, the lead cardiologist stepped out to speak with waiting staff and media representatives. His words would later be repeated across every news channel. "Mr. Caldwell suffered a major cardiac event," he explained carefully, "but he arrived in time. Immediate intervention saved his life." Then came the statement that stunned viewers everywhere. If treatment had been delayed even 5 minutes, Ethan Caldwell would have died. The message spread instantly. 5 minutes. That thin line separated life from death. Interviews began discussing the unidentified waitress who performed CPR. Commentators praised the importance of emergency training. Health experts reminded viewers to recognize heart attack symptoms. But Tanya never saw any of it. She didn't follow business news, and after her exhausting shift ended, she simply went home, showered, and slept, trying to forget the terrifying scene. The next morning, she returned to work as usual, expecting whispers or maybe curious customers asking questions. Instead, life seemed almost normal. The breakfast crowd arrived, orders were taken, dishes were served. A few co-workers mentioned seeing clips online and congratulated her nervously, but the restaurant manager discouraged staff from talking about the incident to avoid attracting attention. Tanya was secretly relieved. She didn't want fame or drama. She needed steady hours and reliable tips to help pay rent and support her mother, who still struggled financially after Tanya's father passed away. To her, the event felt like something that simply happened during work. She had done what any decent person should do, nothing more. Days passed, and the excitement slowly faded. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm of busy mornings and crowded lunches. Tanya convinced herself the billionaire probably didn't even remember her. People like him lived in a completely different world. She doubted their paths would ever cross again. Then, 3 days later, everything changed again. Tanya was carrying a tray of drinks toward a table when the restaurant manager suddenly burst from his office, looking both nervous and excited. His tie hung crooked, and sweat dotted his forehead as he scanned the room urgently. When he spotted Tanya, he practically ran toward her. "Tanya," he called loudly, startling nearby customers. "Someone important is here to see you." She blinked in confusion, nearly dropping the tray. "Me?" she asked, certain there must be some mistake. "No one important ever came looking for her." The manager nodded quickly. "Outside, right now." Curious glances followed her as she handed the tray to another server and walked toward the entrance. She expected maybe a reporter or someone from corporate management. Instead, when she stepped outside, her breath caught in her throat. Standing near a sleek black car surrounded by discreet security personnel was Ethan Caldwell himself. Alive, standing, looking thinner and slightly pale but undeniably alive. He wore a simple jacket instead of his usual tailored suit, and there were faint dark circles under his eyes. Yet he smiled when he saw her. Through the restaurant windows, employees and customers froze in disbelief as recognition spread. Conversations stopped. Phones appeared again as whispers rippled through the room. Ethan Caldwell, billionaire CEO, had personally come to their restaurant, and he was walking straight toward Tanya. Her heart pounded nervously. She felt suddenly self-conscious in her uniform apron and simple shoes. She wasn't used to attention, especially from someone whose face regularly appeared on magazine covers. Ethan stopped in front of her, his expression warm and sincere. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "You saved my life." Simplicity of his words stunned her. Tanya felt heat rise to her cheeks. She shifted awkwardly, unsure where to look. I just did what anyone would do, she replied softly. She meant it. Helping someone in danger felt natural, not heroic. Ethan shook his head gently. No, he said. Everyone else ignored the signs. His tone wasn't angry, just honest. He glanced back toward the restaurant where executives had panicked while she acted. You were the only one paying attention. Tanya remembered the executives laughing, brushing off concerns, assuming nothing serious could happen during a business breakfast. She shrugged slightly, still uncomfortable being praised. I just remembered my training, she said. Ethan's expression grew more serious. Doctors told me something, he continued. If help hadn't come immediately, I wouldn't be here. His voice softened. I wouldn't have seen my daughter graduate next year. I wouldn't have finished the projects I started. I wouldn't have had another chance. Tanya swallowed, realizing the weight of what he was saying. For him, survival wasn't just about money or companies. It was about family, time, unfinished life. Ethan extended his hand. She hesitated before shaking it, unsure how to respond. Around them, employees pressed closer to the windows, unable to hide their curiosity. Ethan smiled again, a little tired but grateful. I owed you a thank you in person, he said. Not through press statements or company emails. Personally, Tanya nodded shyly. She didn't know what to say, so she simply replied, I'm glad you're okay. For a moment, they stood there awkwardly, two people from completely different worlds connected by a single life-changing moment. Neither of them realized yet that this meeting was only the beginning of something far bigger than either expected. They sat together privately in one of the restaurant's quiet conference rooms, away from curious customers, employees, and the cameras still lingering outside in hopes of capturing another glimpse of Ethan Caldwell. The manager had hurriedly arranged the space, placing water and coffee on the table as if hosting an important business meeting. In a way, it was. Tanya felt slightly uncomfortable sitting across from one of the wealthiest men in the country, still wearing her server uniform, while Ethan, though visibly recovering, carried the calm authority of someone used to boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations. Yet today, there was something different about him. He looked humbled, grateful, human. For a moment, neither spoke. Ethan studied the room quietly before finally breaking the silence. The doctors were very direct with me, he began, his voice calmer than the commanding tone heard in interviews. They said this wasn't random. My body had been warning me for years. Tanya listened quietly, unsure what to say. Ethan leaned back slightly, careful with his movements. Recovery clearly still took effort. Stress, he continued. Long hours, no sleep, endless meetings, flights across time zones, bad food, too much coffee, not enough rest. He gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. They told me my heart has been trying to get my attention for a long time. Tanya nodded slowly. She'd seen customers like him every day, busy, distracted, rushing through meals while glued to phones. Ethan sighed. But meetings mattered more, he admitted. Deals mattered more, money mattered more. He paused, then added quietly, until the day my heart finally decided it couldn't wait anymore. Tanya remembered how close he'd been to dying on the restaurant floor. The panic, the silence, the feeling that time itself had stopped. Ethan looked at her again, sincerity clear in his expression. And then, he said softly, you noticed what no one else did. Tanya shifted slightly, uncomfortable with praise. To her, it had simply been instinct, experience, memory. Ethan leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. So tell me, he asked, his tone direct but kind, what can I do to thank you? The question caught her off guard. She hadn't expected anything beyond gratitude. She shook her head quickly. I don't need anything, sir. Ethan smiled faintly. Everyone needs something. Not for helping someone, she replied quietly. I just did my job. Ethan studied her for a moment, sensing she meant it, but he wasn't convinced. Successful businessmen rarely accepted simple answers. They looked deeper. Tell me about yourself, he said instead. What do you want to do in life? Tanya hesitated. No one important had ever asked her that question before. Customers rarely saw waitresses as people with dreams. They saw service, not stories. She shrugged at first. Nothing special, she said softly. Ethan waited patiently, saying nothing, encouraging honesty through silence. Finally, Tanya spoke. She told him about working since high school to help her mother after her father died, about her younger brother, still in school, who depended on her income, about balancing two jobs while trying to attend community college classes whenever she could afford tuition. She admitted she once dreamed of becoming a nurse after seeing hospital staff try desperately to save her father. She wanted to help families before it was too late. But reality had other plans. Tuition fees piled up. Loans became overwhelming. Bills came first. Dreams came last. So now, she finished with a small smile, I just work. Ethan listened without interrupting. The simplicity of her story struck him harder than complicated financial reports ever could. Here sat the woman who had saved his life, yet she struggled daily just to survive. Someone who acted without hesitation while people like him debated profits. He leaned back, thoughtful, as a quiet realization formed in his mind. Money had never been his problem, purpose had. After a long pause, Ethan spoke carefully. You said you wanted to become a nurse. Tanya nodded slightly. I did. Ethan smiled. Then maybe you still can. She frowned, slightly unsure what he meant. Ethan didn't explain further that day. Instead, he thanked her again, shook her hand and left, promising they would speak again soon. Tanya assumed that was the end of it. Another unexpected encounter in a life full of hard work. But a week later, everything changed. News channels once again erupted with headlines about Ethan Caldwell, but this time, the story shocked everyone for a different reason. Caldwell Innovations launches medical scholarship program named after Waitress who saved CEO. Billionaire funds national program to train future nurses and emergency responders. From Waitress to future nurse, the story inspiring thousands. Tanya learned about it the same way everyone else did, through her phone exploding with messages from co-workers and family members. Confused, she turned on the television in her small apartment and nearly dropped the remote. Ethan stood at a press conference podium, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Behind him, a large screen displayed bold words, the Tanya Medical Scholarship Initiative. Ethan addressed the audience calmly. Last week, my life was saved not by money, status, or power, he said. It was saved by awareness, by someone who paid attention. He went on to explain the program would fund medical education for students pursuing nursing and emergency care, starting with the woman who inspired it. Tanya sat frozen on her couch as reporters announced she would receive full funding to pursue nursing school, including tuition, books, and living assistance. Her hands trembled. Tears blurred her vision. She hadn't asked for anything, yet somehow everything had changed. Days later, when reporters finally interviewed her outside the restaurant, microphones extended toward her, cameras capturing her nervous smile, she spoke honestly. I just want more people to notice the signs, Tanya said softly. If someone had noticed sooner, maybe my father would still be here. Her voice wavered, but her words resonated nationwide. Because suddenly, the story wasn't just about a billionaire saved. It was about second chances, about paying attention, about ordinary people making extraordinary differences without realizing it. And for Tanya, life was no longer just about surviving long shifts and paying bills. For the first time in years, her future felt possible. And somewhere, Ethan Caldwell watched the interview, grateful that the worst day of his life had given someone else the chance to build a better one. 1 year later, Tanya walked into a hospital wearing scrubs. Not as a visitor, but as a trainee nurse. In one recovery room sat Ethan Caldwell, attending routine checkups. He smiled when he saw her. Looks like we both got second chances. She laughed, and now I get to help others get theirs. News reporters later asked Ethan why he started funding emergency training programs nationwide. His answer was simple, because the most important person in the room isn't always the richest. Tanya Brooks, once invisible, became proof that sometimes the person everyone overlooks becomes the one who saves everything.